afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another Beyond 20 webinar. Today we're going to be talking about service catalog, an 8-step practical approach to getting one of those rolling. I'm Lindsay with Beyond 20. I'm going to quickly introduce our panelists today and then turn it over and we'll get started. Just a quick note. Before we get rolling, however, if you have any questions, go ahead and just enter those into the chat bar. I'm going to keep an eye on that as we go, and we'll rudely interrupt our dear sweet panelists as they're speaking so we can address them as they come up. If there's by chance one we don't get to, we will certainly contact you later, get back with you, but we'll get it answered as best we can. So first, we've got Andy Rivers. He's a senior advisor with us at Beyond 20. And we also have Brian Flora, who's a principal here. Both have extensive experience working with all manner of ITIL and ITSM processes. But there's a lot going on in terms of service catalog, a lot of wisdom they have to share. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Brian, and we will get rolling.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Lindsay. Really appreciate the intro. That gives us a lot to live up to here. So first of all, I see a lot of names on the webinar that we know. A lot of folks that have worked with us in the past, but still some that we don't. So I wanted to go ahead and give a quick introduction of Beyond 20. Beyond 20 is what we like to say a 360-degree consulting firm, and what we offer, we specialize in IT service management and in Agile and Scrum frameworks. So that really accounts for the lion's share of what we do as an organization. What we believe is that process makes perfect. So the name Beyond 20 really comes from the idea that 80% of your mission-critical IT service downtime ultimately comes from what we call people and process failures, and only 20% really is accounted for by hardware failures, software failures, natural disasters, and all the rest of those things. So the other 80% is really the space that we play in helping organizations to kind of take things out of the books, take best practice frameworks like ITIL, like CMMI, like Scrum, and really figure out how do we take those concepts and that theory and turn it into real actionable business value. So that's really at the core of what we believe in. I've been working with Beyond 20 now since 2006 and had the opportunity to work with a number of organizations in different sectors, public and private. Andy Rivers, who's here with us as well, is a senior ITSM advisor for Beyond 20, as Lindsay mentioned. He comes to us as former associate CIO for the University of Tennessee statewide system. So I know a lot of you guys are on this because this is number 3 in our series, our higher education ITSM series. And we're going to continue doing those every single month of 2015 and really trying to start nailing off a lot of those things that you see in the EDUCAUSE top 10 issues. And beyond that, just issues that we saw that we see in our higher education customers, and that our customers are really telling us that they want to know about, and issues that they're facing. And a big one of those is service catalog, but I'll let Andy speak to that a little bit as well, and his background and so forth.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. As you mentioned, service catalog is one of those things that higher education struggles in, and really a lot of places still struggle in it. And it's kind of surprising because it's one of those things that's fundamental to doing IT service management, but it is really hard to quantify and identify the exact services that we offer. So often we went for years of just doing IT. And that's what we did. That's how we described it. But now we really need to come back and say, okay, within that umbrella of IT, what are the services that we provide? And in higher ed especially, that's such a wide breadth of services that we offer, from, student-only services, maybe people that live in the dorms, you got to provide a service for internet service for them, all the way to, faculty have a unique service of helping them design, instructional design, those types of things. So have a really wide breadth of services that we offer. So not only do we have to identify those, but we have to be able to present them in a fashion to our customers that they understand it and can consume it. And so, again, this is kind of a common thing we share across the industry, but I think it's especially complex and complicated in higher education.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, yeah, thanks very much for that. And yeah, as you mentioned, this is something that our higher education customers care about. But I know a lot of you guys are from other sectors as well, and this is one of those that is something that every organization deals with. So the structure that we're going to deal with here today is we're going to start by first of all talking about what a service catalog is. We'll go into kind of the business case for why should I even care about this? Why does it make sense to implement and adopt this kind of an approach and to build a service catalog? And then once you've decided to do so, we're going to get into the real kind of meat of the presentation, which is what I suspect a lot of you guys came for, is to figure out, okay, so how do we go about doing this? This is something people struggle with quite a bit. So starting out with the definition, ITIL calls this a database or a structured document. It contains information about all of your live IT services, and that includes those things that are available for deployment, even if they're not yet in the live environment, things that a customer could request. So it's meant to be kind of a single source of truth, and it's really meant to be just like any other catalog that you would think of. So if you think about the Crutchfield or J. Crew or J.C. Penney catalogs, all of those things really exist solely for the purpose of presenting to customers a list of simply what is available and how you would go about getting those things. Another way to think about it is like the menu in a restaurant, right? And a lot of organizations, if you're dealing with if you're working in a place where you don't have a functional, accurate, current service catalog, it's very much like running a restaurant without a menu. And think for just a moment what that might be like. Right? People can just come in and sort of order whatever they want, and in the meantime, the folks that are working back in the kitchen are just absolutely killing themselves trying to make sure that they meet expectations and so forth, and not really able to staff or plan or purchase appropriately to meet that expectation. And guess what? At the end, nobody's satisfied when they get the check, right? So uh, that's what I think, Andy. You were the one that said this a few years ago when you were at University of Tennessee when we first met. We were talking about that concept, and I think I remember you telling me that it was not even just like the restaurant that you guys had kind of that shadow IT popping up. So I remember you saying something along the lines of, yeah, it's not even that they just come in and order whatever. We've got a whole group of people back in the corner of a restaurant that have started a little fire and they're barbecuing a goat and and then complaining to us about that it doesn't taste right.
Exactly. It's almost like they set up their own mini kitchen on the side and then came to us and said, "I don't like this food." And you're like, "But you cooked it, you know." And so you had that whole different dynamic there. So.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, the purpose here of this process is really just to produce and maintain that defined catalog of services. You're building the menu, and then what goes along with that is making sure that that menu is not only there, but that it's accurate and that it's current and that it's complete and that it's consistent with the rest of what's in your service portfolio. So sticking with that restaurant analogy, if I go in and I sit down and order something off the menu, and the waiter says, okay, well, sorry, we're out of that. And I pick something else, and they say, oh, you know what, we're out of that too. Well, before you know it, I'm going to drop the menu and say, okay, so what do you have? Because clearly this isn't it, right? I'll ultimately stop using that, and that's what your customers will do as well. Now, it's worth talking about the fact that we kind of talk about two types of services or two types of service catalogs. And you might divide them up this way. First you've got your customer-facing services, which we talk about as a business service catalog. And 99% of the time when we say service catalog, that's what we mean. That's the menu. That's the things that we're showing to our customers. At Beyond 20, our website is really our service catalog. It's a way for you to go and see all of the things that we offer and what those things cost and how you would go about ordering and procuring those things. But then there are also these supporting services, the technical service catalog. And the restaurant analogy, number one there is the menu. Number two is really the cookbook. It's saying, all the things that the kitchen needs to know in order to figure out how to provide that.
Yeah, and I think this is good, to point out that you have these two types of services. And for us in IT, it's often hard for us to to distinguish the difference. Or maybe more accurately, a lot of times we just look at the supporting services because that's what we do day in and day out. So whenever we look at our service catalog, we think of things like, oh, we offer database administration. Well, really, that's not what the customers are asking. That's not what we're offering to them. We're supporting an application for them, and database administration just happens to be one of those supporting services that we need. So one of the things we'll talk through as we get through these tips is make sure you distinguish between those two. Make sure you're presenting your customer facing to your customers, and make sure you have the technical ones for your internal staff.
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's talk about why this matters. I mean, the first thing that I would say is that if we talk about adopting IT service management, about implementing ITIL and starting to go down the service management path and starting to make that shift as an organization away from focusing on just delivery of technology and being the gatekeepers of technology and more toward being a true service organization. Well, it makes sense that the logical first step might be to identify exactly what services we provide in the first place. What is it that we deliver? So that's really the core of it for me. And a lot of times this ends up being a really good starting point or jumping off point for implementing a service management program or adopting ITIL-based practices.
Right. This really helps you kind of get the foundation there. Okay, now we can start doing IT service management because we have our services defined. Until you kind of get that done, it's hard to really jump into some of these, some of the ITIL and IT service management processes because you have to have that list of services. It also allows you to have a different and better conversation with your customers because now you're talking about services rather than particular technology solutions. And it really drives more of the value discussion rather than just the what's up, what's down type discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. So, before we jump into the rest of this, I'd like to do a kind of quick informal poll. If you guys can just respond in the question pane there. Where are you today with Service Catalog? Do you have a Service Catalog that's fully functional that you're happy with? Do you not have one at all? Do you have one, but maybe it's not integrated with your service management tool, or it's ad hoc, or where are you, and then where do you want to be? So we'll just take a couple of minutes to see what you have to say on that.
Okay, I'm just going to start rattling these off here. We've got quite a few responses all over the gamut, really. We've got, yes, we have one and it's defined. We've got, no, we don't have one at all. A couple of those. We've got some works in progress, so that's something. Yeah, a lot of not at alls. Let's see. Trying to create one. That's great. Do not have, do not have. Have a catalog that is primarily technology application focused, but are in the process of transforming the catalog to true business services.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. We only have a
So,
framework of services. Yeah, we're kind of all over the place here.
so what are you guys that are trying to do this or not doing it? What are the biggest struggles that you're running into? What challenges? What's keeping you from having a complete and current and accurate and the service catalog that you'd consider to be ideal?
So while Lindsay's kind of going over those responses, I think what we saw there across the gambit's pretty common. That
Yeah,
some
yeah.
people either haven't started or they're part of the way. And there's a few, out there ahead of the game. They already have it defined, but I think one of the challenges is even if you have it defined, is not treating it like a destination. But we always say it's a journey. So make sure you don't
Yeah.
say, "Oh, we're done with the catalog. Let's move on to the next thing," because it needs constant grooming. It needs constant sort of observations. Going back to your example, if I go to a restaurant and I keep ordering things off the menu and they're not there anymore or it's different, at some point I stop looking at the menu.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with that. So
Looks like we've got, I'm seeing a theme here, struggles with clearly defining what's included in the catalog.
yeah.
That looks like a common struggle. And then there's kind of your standard time and resources question. How do you set time aside to make something like this happen?
Yeah. No, I suspected that would be the case. It's funny, we actually came up with this, started delivering this webinar based on, actually, we had created a service offering of our own. So we do a 2-day facilitated service catalog development workshop for our customers, and that came out of the fact that we do a lot of tool implementations and other types of ITSM consulting, and one of the challenges we found almost everyone had was building a service catalog. We would go in to start getting the list of services, and I can remember one time one of our consultants went into a healthcare, a hospital customer that they were trying to build their service catalog into a tool, and when they showed up to the meeting, they had a spreadsheet with 2,100 different quote unquote services. And, okay, these are the 2,100 services we have. Well, guess what? You don't have 2,100 services, and it's not uncommon to have people do that. It's just, a lot of times it's hard to figure out what the difference is between an application and a service, or between hardware and software and services, and really figure out what those things are. I mean, the one rule of thumb I'd give you is that I don't think that I've ever seen an organization that has more than about 50 services, and 50 is really quite a lot. That most of the time you're going to have, most IT organizations probably have anywhere between 15 and 30 services. That's pretty common, and the rest of those things end up being, now we're talking customer facing things we put directly in our service catalog. The rest of those things might be supporting services that IT uses, or things that are kind of on the back end. Okay, so let's jump right in, since we've identified what the challenges are. We've promised you 8 steps, and that's what we have. So the first step that we're going to do here is to identify and categorize our stakeholders, and we'll delve into each of these individually here in a moment. Define what our lines of service are. We want to build a template and create a catalog template, define and categorize those, start mapping those services to customers. And then once we've done that, now we can start identifying what the underpinning agreements are that support these things. So, basically looking at this and figuring out what the SLAs and OLAs are and so forth. Define the KPIs and metrics that we care about in terms of these services, and map those and include those as part of our linkage to our service catalog. And then finally figure out how are we going to, if we want to make this, as Andy was saying, a journey and not a destination. We don't want this to be the treadmill that you bought for Christmas that now by February 5th is something you just hang clothes on. This is going to be something that we do on an ongoing basis. And so that means we have to figure out how our service catalog integrates with our other processes, and how we're going to manage continual service improvement on this thing, and how that's going to work. So jumping in and identifying the categorizing stakeholders, I'll let Andy take the lead on this part.
Yeah, so one of the main things you want to be able to start doing is, okay, who's going to own this? Back to kind of ITIL fundamentals 101, you need to have one owner. And so again, this owner is not going to be the one that's responsible for all the content, but you need to go to somebody to say, okay, this is our service catalog person. So if I have an issue with it, or there's, it's not getting done, I got one person to go to. And so, it's also that idea of, I'm not trying to track down an entire committee to understand why my catalog's not done or why it hasn't been updated. I have this one process owner. Another key point is identifying, who are your customers for this. Sometimes that's a little bit more challenging than we think than it should be. Next is, decision makers. Who are the ones that need to be involved in the discussion, can help me decide what's a service, what's not a service. Then one of the major things too, especially as we move more into this broker-dealer model of using other people to provide services, we got to be concerned about our suppliers. What are they providing? How are they supporting the services we offer? And finally, you want to be able to have this RACI so that we have this all defined. Who's accountable? Who's responsible? Who do I have to inform? Who needs to be involved in this entire process of identifying them and then talking to their role. So let's go back and unpack these a little bit. So one of the things that'll help you is if you identify your customers, they're going to be a great sounding board as you put this together. So I think we cover that a little bit more in depth, but I'll go ahead and unpack it a little bit now. And we mentioned one of the challenges was not being able to define our services. Well, your customers are going to be hugely valuable in answering that question. My recommendation is you go through, come up with a skeleton sort of service catalog, and then sit down with your customers. See, does it make sense? Does it work? Do they understand what you're trying to get across? Those types of things.
Right. So yeah, no, sorry, we got a little bit of delay here, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, and what you're seeing here in the chart below is called a RACI VS. Now, I know ITIL talks very traditionally about a RACI model, but some of you folks that might be from DoD, Department of Defense organizations might recognize the RACI VS. So the V being for validation and S for sign off. So if you have some organizations, you might need to go beyond just mapping out. You're really building a stakeholder map here. And sometimes if you want to formalize how the approvals are done for these things, then you might use that as well. But ultimately what you're really trying to do is understand who your stakeholders are, work out their influence, their interests, so ultimately who to focus on, how to win their support, and ultimately get that recorded in this stakeholder map so that you can have this as a foundational understanding to move forward on the project. The next thing, so go ahead, Andy. Yeah.
I was just going to add, when you look at this, you might think, man, so we got to do all this work. We got to identify all these people and potentially have it validated and signed off just to list all our services. Well, you got to keep the big picture in mind. And that's actually one of the lessons learned that we had from one of the service catalogs we worked on is, this service catalog and defining your services is going to be the foundation for so many things going forward. You're going to set SLAs against it. You're going to do your financial management. So this is a really important piece. So you need to have a lot of structure around it to make sure that it's going to hold up as you go farther down doing IT service management.
Yeah, absolutely. So, next, one of the things that I always like to do is start by defining what we would call lines of services. So, really, a line of service is just sort of a grouping of related services. So, we can, and the ones you have on the slide here are just simply examples. They're not meant to be prescriptive or anything like that. Not every customer is going to go with this, but you guys already called it out, some of you, that it's hard to figure out what services and what things should be included in these. And sometimes if you start by just coming up and figuring out what your lines of service are, then you can start working downward from that, saying, okay, well, these are the categories of services we provide and what things might fall into those. So if you start talking about things like access and rental services. So if you lease and license management, procurement, supplier relationship management, even desktop support to some extent, you might classify as that. Things like remedial services. Now, I know that that term doesn't necessarily ring a bell with a lot of folks, but if you classify that as a high-level line of service, then you can categorize things like recovery and resolution of incidents and problems and repair services. So if you think about a lot of the things that we do in service operations, like providing a service desk and incident management and problem management, those are things that obviously, ITIL traditionally talks about the service desk as a function and incident management and problem management as processes, but they can also be services in certain ways. I know it's kind of heresy sometimes in terms of a pure ITIL implementation, but in the real world, we might sell different service packages where, on one package we might offer just the software, but access to a service desk might be an enhancement there, and that's ultimately a service that's provided. Custodial services, things to store and protect data, monitor for availability and do protection there. Or, a lot of times you look at, creative services, so design, development, engineering, so, capacity planning, things like that, when the business says, hey, we're going to start launching a new initiative, IT might need to do some capacity planning. That might be a service. Andy, you've talked about some specific services that that you might provide in education that might be unique to that particular environment. You might define those as a line of service, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, within the line of services, I could think of four big groupings within higher education. We're there to support students. So, what's our student support services? What's all involved around supporting the students? That's our learning management systems, our, enrollment. So you got Banner, you got Blackboard if you want to talk applications, but, you have what's around supporting the students. Another line is, what I call admin support. What do we do to just help the business of the university function? You have some sort of ERP application that does all your finance, does all your HR. So there's some support involved around that. The third big area would be, for those of you that are research institutions, what are you doing to support the research of the university? From, the grant management all the way down to potentially offering research services to help faculty do computational services, so you may even go down to that granular. Another, fourth big bucket is, outreach services. That's one of the missions for many universities is actually outreach to the community and areas around them. So what are you doing to support those initiatives? So, if you're looking at lines of service within higher education, starting out with those four big lines can really kind of jumpstart your thought process and how you can start grouping these things together.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll start looking at some of those, possible lines of service and some examples of higher education service catalogs a little later in this presentation. So the next thing we want to do is create a catalog template. I actually saw a couple of folks in the responses that said, they had tool or technology limitations that were keeping them from service cataloging, and I don't think that necessarily needs to be an issue. Now, that might keep you from maturing past a certain point, but fundamentally, Excel works just fine as a basic service catalog. If you want to get started with this process, I always recommend that people just build an Excel spreadsheet and start with these things. Now, the template that you see, kind of mocked up here in the slide is really just simply an example. So you don't have to use every single one of these columns. And as you're maturing the process, the first iteration might not use all of them. But what we're doing in our service catalog workshop is really helping people to build this out in a template. So you get the data, and then once you have the data, then you can start to, now you have a foundation to build it out into, we do a lot in Sharewell, but if you want to build it into Remedy or into something else, then it's really, it's garbage in, garbage out. So starting with some kind of a template here is a really good idea. So you might start on the left with a list of what services you have, what line of service that falls into, quick description of the service. If you want to go into including things that are business facing, core services, you might list that as a service type versus a supporting or enabling service. If it's a core service, then you might go to that next column and say, okay, what are the supporting services that we depend on? So, if one of the services is, data warehousing, then it may depend on enterprise storage as a supporting service. It may depend on, some of those types of things. What business units does it support? These are ones that you might start out with as optional. Who are the contacts there? I definitely, if you can, I'd want to talk about who owns that service. Link to an existing service level agreement if you have it. Now, you wouldn't necessarily put that in the catalog, but you might put a link to where it is on a share. Hours, any reports and reviews on the service, and ultimately, if you're doing pricing or chargeback, then that would be something you might want to include here on that template as well. So now we go into actually defining and categorizing the services. We're really populating that template that we just talked about, right? So we've got the template built. This, of course, is a challenge sometimes, so we might want to look at it and some of the sources that you might use to find out what those things are. Ask your customers. Sometimes in IT we get so wrapped around what we do day to day that it becomes difficult to really narrow it down. That's how you end up with the spreadsheet with 2,200 items in it. But then when you go to the customers and say, how do you actually interact with IT? What do we do for you? then they can tell you a lot of times in very simple, plain business English, which is what a service catalog should be, what services they use, and that can give you a starting point. Another source might be if you've done a business impact analysis or a continuity planning exercise, maybe some of those things already exist, or maybe your information security management or those folks may have a lot of this stuff already in place in another location. But again, if you don't have those things, starting with the lines of service and working backward from there can really help to do that. And sometimes it's helpful if you look at categorizing it as customer facing versus supporting and technical. It can really help you to deal with some of the conflicts or murkiness or confusion that you deal with. One thing we always run into in these workshops is things like, the network. Is the network a service? Well, yeah, I mean, it does meet the definition of a service for the most part, but at the same time, most organizations, if you just provide a network and nothing else, would your customers think you gave them a service? Yeah, probably not, unless you're Verizon or AT&T and that's your business. Most of the time, that's a supporting service. That the network is one of those things that is a supporting or technical or enabling service that's necessary to support all kinds of other things. Andy, how do you in your environment, how did you go about helping identify what those services are?
Yeah, so I like the first one, is ask customers. Now, one of the things I like to go ahead and mention with that is I recommend going for that conversation with your customer, go in there with some sort of list. You don't want to just go in there with an open-ended, hey, what services do we offer you? Because you kind of get that chicken and egg scenario. So what I recommend is going into that conversation with 2 or 3 of your kind of well-defined, the one knows we offer, and that kind of helps get the conversation going. And so one of those might be, your service desk. You're offering some service desk, some help desk type support, whatever you call that in your organization right now, you're offering that. So kind of go in there with that conversation already seated. If you happen to have, already a business impact analysis or continuity plan, that is a great place to start because those are critical things to your customers. So that helps with the customer conversation as well. So and like we said, the lines of service is a good one. Okay, what are the big groups of what we offer? And let's start unpacking those.
We've got a question here, if I could be so bold. Question around examining patterns of business activity and user profiles with respect to the service catalog. How does that play in?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, what we're talking about there are sort of core concepts in what ITIL talks about in terms of demand management. Now, there's a couple ways we can look at that. That might be a way to start understanding what your services are. So you might say, okay, well, we seem to be the busiest between between October and December 31st. And what are we busy doing, right? And that might help you work backward into it. Where I see the biggest intersection, though, between those types of demand management activities and user profiles and PBAs is really in trying to use the service catalog as a tool to support business relationship management. So on one side, BRM can start looking at those PBAs, those identified patterns of business activity. And what we should be doing is mapping those things to services. All the services in our catalog, we want to have those things mapping to a particular a pattern of business activity. Now, what you might find is that this ends up supporting, not only BRM but effective portfolio management. Because a lot of the time, what you'll find is that that maybe you've got a pattern of business activity, which is something that is happening with the business, that the business has a need basically, or a demand pattern that doesn't match up to a service in your catalog. Well, okay, from a BRM perspective, that tells us, hey, we've got an opportunity. There's a service that our customers want that we don't offer, and we need to figure out how to get that into our catalog so we can support that PBA. One of the other things that we might find, though, is that maybe you've got you've got services that you offer that don't match up with a pattern of business activity, and that's really a question of portfolio management. And I know just about everybody has this. We're just not always aware of it. These are these legacy systems that are out there that we still keep spending money on, but that don't necessarily drive or support business outcomes, right? So the catalog ends up being a supporting tool for that, or maybe we find that we've got 3 or 4 different services that support that same PBA. Maybe we're supporting 4 different project management platforms, and from a portfolio management perspective, that opens up an opportunity for us to inspect that and figure out if we've got redundancy, and maybe we need to sort of normalize that list a little bit so that we can be a little bit more efficient with our spend and start allocating resources toward things that better support those activities. I don't know if that answered your question, or if there was, if not, then please let us know. But yeah, keep the questions coming, guys.
As Lindsay mentioned, we look forward to being rudely interrupted with questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the next thing that actually segues very well, because the next thing we're looking at doing is really trying to map our services to customers. So we've got that catalog, that list of services, and now we want to try to figure out who actually uses this. And so what that allows us to do is to present multiple views of a service catalog, right? That means that we want to know what services are used by which customers. This is really relevant and really kind of cast in stark relief when you look at higher education customers, because certain services are used by students that maybe are not used by staff or faculty. There are other services that really are only available or should only be presented to a view that is accessible by faculty and staff that students would not be allowed to request, or maybe not even interested in requesting, and that helps us to facilitate that. But the other thing would be to start really looking at then feeding that into your business impact analysis for continuity planning, starting to understand if this service fails, what customers are really impacted, or if we have to take downtime on it because we have to implement a change or a new release that requires us to take it offline. Who do we need to contact about that, and what vital business functions does that actually support?
Yeah, so that helps set up a lot of things. Whenever you have an outage for a system, a lot of times we just blast it out to everybody because we're not real sure who actually uses the service. So we default to, well, let's send it to everybody and hope they actually see the message. One of the things this allows you to do is actually target those messages. Maybe you do the blast, but you also send a very specific message to the users of that service so they know there's something happening with it. And as Brian mentioned, one of the things it allows you to do is, a customer view. The extreme examples I can give you is you don't want a faculty member browsing through your service catalog and going, why, yes, I would like a network connection in my dorm room. That doesn't even apply for them. Or, a student going, well, yeah, that would be really awesome if I got help doing my instructional design. They're not even teaching a class. They don't need that service, So if they really can't service it and they don't use it, don't show it to them. Just avoid that level of confusion.
Right. Yeah, real targeted communication there. The next step, and as you'll see, a lot of these things end up being, when we start out, we're talking about identifying roles and responsibilities and building the template. And now we're looking at really how to make the process more integrated and more ultimately supportable. So what we want to do is to start identifying what the underpinning agreements are with this. So, of course, you're going to have an interaction with service level management here. So linking to our SLAs, understanding what the operational level agreements are that support those things with internal suppliers, as well as what underpinning contracts that you might have with your third-party vendors that support those. Now, we just had a conversation with a customer about this yesterday. If you are one of the many organizations that does not have robust, fully formed service level management in place and SLAs for every service and so forth, don't despair on this. This doesn't mean that you have to not do a service catalog. You can start out with very basic SLAs. You can start out with simple tiered category system, gold, silver, bronze. And once you get those things in place, then you can start to say, okay, well, gold, silver, bronze are 3 levels of service, and we can build basic priority-driven SLAs around those, and just link your services to that. And then as that process matures, you can start expanding the number and the get a more targeted nature around the SLAs and OLAs that you have. But it also still helps you to understand what those suppliers are, and to maybe help to manage your application catalog a little bit as well. You were talking about that yesterday, Andy, looking at what we're paying for.
Yeah, so one of the ways you can identify some of this is actually tracking the money. Well, who are we paying? How do we backfill from where the bills are going out to the services that we provide? I also really like this slide and want to make sure we hit on the fact that we really rely on external suppliers now, and the only way to really hold up against that is if it's in our underpinning contract. Does our contract hold them to certain things? And whatever it holds them to, that's now what our SLA is based on. So I'll give you an example. So we had disaster recovery solutions. And for that, for some of our services, we offered that type of recovery for them. Well, our underpinning contract said that the providing vendor had 24 hours to get the facilities ready. Well, guess what? That means our SLA could not be any less than 24 hours because the underpinning contract had 24 hours. So really, we had 24 hours plus whatever it took us to build it. That's what we based our SLA on. So what we have with our suppliers really determines a lot of the SLAs, the expectations we set, and the ones that we can meet. One of the examples I also like to caution people is we were with one customer and they said, hey, we have this contract with a provider and it doesn't stipulate their response times at all in the contract. What can we do to hold them to a 4-hour response time? And unfortunately, my answer was nothing. You can't. You don't have that in the contract. So maybe out of the goodness of their heart, they will start helping you in a 4-hour window. But unless you go back and renegotiate that contract and get a different underpinning contract, you can't hold them accountable for that.
Yeah, I was going to say you could bake them cookies. That very well might help.
Yeah, it might help for the first few, but those got to be some good cookies. So.
I'm pretty responsive to that kind of thing. I'm pretty easily influenced with the right chocolate chip cookie.
Okay, good to know. Good to know.
All right. So moving on, then the next thing we want to do is to start, managing by metrics, right? We're always big on a metrics-based approach to service management. So identifying what the key performance indicators are for your service catalog process. Now, each one of those needs to support a critical success factor. Critical success factors are these things. They're just what they sound like, right? These are the things that really must happen if we're going to be effective at service catalog management. So, for example, maintaining an accurate and complete service catalog is a critical success factor. Having the business be aware of service offerings, that they know what we have. That IT is aware of those things, and that we can map those things together. So those end up being critical success factors to get it right. And so if we know that those are the things that are important, now we can start selecting a palette of key performance indicators that will help us, paint the picture as to whether we're hitting those. So a KPI might be the number of services that are defined, agreed, recorded, and managed. So basically the number of things that we have in our service catalog. As we look at that as a key performance indicator, is that if that's trending upward, then that's probably a good thing. But the reason I say a palette of key performance indicators is that, with these things, it's very rare that one KPI paints a complete picture for you. So you really have to figure out, how do we pick the right mix of KPIs that will tell us what's really going on? So for example, simply having more services listed in your service catalog by itself is not necessarily a good thing unless you combine it with the next one, which is the percentage or number and percentage of variances that you detect with the real world. So how often are we finding that there are things that are in the service catalog that we don't actually offer? It's not just a matter of getting more services in there, but but making sure that information is actually accurate. And these are certainly not an all-inclusive list of those things. You might You might track this through, self-service access. Another thing that might tell you whether people or customers are aware of the service catalog's existence might be a trend in an increasing trend in the percentage of service requests that are handled through a self-service portal, as opposed to ones where people actually contact a service desk. So this one is a little bit older slide, but this is a dashboard of KPIs that we showed for a customer a while back. Moving right into it, the next one is process integration and CSI. So, ultimately we want to have a service catalog policy in place, right? That governs exactly how the service catalog is maintained, how it's operated, who owns it, all those kinds of things. So we want to not only have that policy, but to make sure that people understand what it is, and so forth. One of the things that policy will govern is the management of the service catalog. So, from a policy perspective, at what stage in the development life cycle do we add something to the catalog? How do we control, at what point we project that and tell our customers that it's available, or that we get rid of something? At what point do we get rid of it? And that can be a little bit of a nuanced approach. So, Microsoft, for example, does this with software. So you might see that, for example, they're not selling Windows XP anymore, so that's no longer in the catalog. But until, very recently, I don't know if they've stopped now, Windows XP support was ending. So they might continue to support it and to offer maintenance and things like that for some period of time after you cease to offer the service as a new service. So, that might be how you phase these things out.
We found great value in being able to use the change management process and match those two together, because before something became an active service, it had to go through the change management process. So that was a great gate for us to, everyone now knows about it. Really, support now knows about it, that we're going active with it. It really helped avoid that what I called the walk of shame of having to go down to the service desk and go, oh yeah, by the way, we went live with this morning. So getting it in the service catalog, making visible there, it provided a really good gate for getting things in the service catalog, and then also, as you described, getting things back out of the service catalog.
Yeah, well, I mean, and the policy, I think, in institutions of higher education is maybe more important than most, because when you look at retiring services, sometimes you have to grandfather students in. So you might say that, yeah, this is something that, this is a service that is available for current students, but the students that come in fall 2015, if they're on that catalog year, they're no longer going to get that service. But until the ones in the previous catalog years actually get to a point where they graduate, then we're still going to provide it for them. So we have to figure out, what the policy is for how we're going to present that and manage that potential conflict. But change management is a really good point, because that's where I actually always want to make the service catalog itself that document a configuration item. So we just say, look, any change to the service catalog goes through the change management process, right? In other process integrations, we touched a little bit on request fulfillment as a process, that you might end up using this as the basis for a self-service portal. We're saying, okay, we're going to present these things, and this will be the mechanism by which people request, things from the service desk and so forth. It gets us into tool integration. This one's a couple of years old. This was one that was built for a university up in Michigan, and what they looked at is said, okay, these are the high-level categories of services. We've got web services, telephony, and so forth. This was a view. When we talk about having multiple views, ITIL is, talks about having, a business view and a service view or whatever. But I think that, defining a specific number of views is getting to be a little bit of a moot point due to technology now. So basically what we're doing with most advanced service management platforms is you're integrating with Active Directory or a star ID or some other sort of authentication methodology. And based on your role, we're able to present you, to lock it down service by service and say, yeah, this person's a manager, so they're allowed to see these things. This particular view, for example, was a view for a senior manager. So under conferencing, they were able to, we could integrate this with request fulfillment. So they were able to request a one-time conference setup or request an actual account, their own conference bridge, or submit an incident. But, somebody that was a line level staff might only be able to request a one-time conference number or something like that. So they wouldn't necessarily get all those. This is another one. This is a service catalog that's used by TCU. So TCU has this really nice student-facing service catalog that has knowledge articles and nice information out here for people to look at. But then you can drill down, and if I decide that I want to click on the email and calendaring service, for example, now I can get information about email and calendaring. So it talks about the supporting services, account creation, about your email account. And then over on the right, I get, again, integration with request fulfillment. So I can request an increase in my mailbox size, or a restoration from backup, or I need to have somebody removed because they're no longer with the organization, or help with Outlook setup, or relevant knowledge articles and those kinds of things. So that's another kind of nice way that you can look at providing information to customers about the services that you offer. So for next steps, for those of you guys who are interested in this, we do, as I mentioned earlier, we do offer a service catalog workshop, and this is a private working session with your team. It's 2 days, so we'd come in and help you guys. It's kind of a teach a person to fish type approach. So build out a template, show you how to start getting that populated, identify accountability and ownership and things like that. We do treat ITIL foundations as a prerequisite for that, so we don't spend so much time with foundational level vocabulary and so forth. And then it's followed up with coaching. So facilitated meetings for the next 4 weeks or so that once you leave the workshop and need to go and continue to populate that and get the rest of those things in there, when you invariably run into challenges, then we're there to coach and to help you get that built. So that's an option there. For those of you who want to just learn a little bit more about service management in general, we've got some training course offerings that are up there now, and you can certainly reach out to us on those things if you're interested. What other, Lindsay, you've got the question pane there.
We're all clear.
Okay. Well, if you guys have other questions, then feel free to reach out to us. There's contact information there for me. You can always tweet to us at Beyond20, or Andy and I. You're Beyond Andy. I'm Beyond Brian. So easy to find that way. You can also go, we don't have it up here, but we have blog articles and so forth at beyond20.com/blog, and you can find information about Service Catalog and many other things, or you can find these and other webinars up on our YouTube channel, and we'd encourage you to subscribe to that. Thanks very much, everybody, and have a great afternoon.